Have you recently found yourself in a breakup with a fearful avoidant and wondered if they're going to reach out? Well, I want to share with you in this video 5 reasons that a fearful avoidant might not reach out after a breakup because of some of the inner experience that they're having. And by better understanding their inner experience, this will enable you to not take things so personally and also be clear about what the healthy next step is for you in terms of how you want to communicate or what boundaries you want to set or how you basically want to proceed after that original ending of the relationship. So, reason number one is that fearful avoidants are actually quite afraid of rejection. And they tend to be very sensitive to rejection after a breakup happens. Fearful avoidants in the dating stage, like when they're first getting to know somebody, I would say in that specific case, are not so afraid of rejection. They're pretty blunt and to the point, and they sort of go after what they want, and they can be a little bit fearless in that sense. However, once they've formed an attachment, a lot of those inner attachment traumas and wounds can really come to the surface and start impacting them. And in those cases specifically, if once that bond has been formed, it's then been broken down or eroded in some way because of a breakup or because of some kind of, constant like being on the rocks or breaking up and making up and sort of going through that pattern or cycle, that's when fearful avoidants become quite afraid of rejection. They can be afraid of getting hurt or letting their feelings sort of come on too strongly again. And that can cause them to really want to create that distance or maintain that distance, or in the very least, just be really afraid of reaching out. Number two is that fearful avoidants are afraid of being vulnerable. They tend to have stories about vulnerability or limiting beliefs about vulnerability. Things like, if I'm too vulnerable, then I'm weak. If I'm too vulnerable, I'll be taken advantage of. If I'm too vulnerable, then I'll be foolish or have the wool kind of pulled over my eyes in some way. And they have these limiting beliefs and fears, whereas the reality of vulnerability is that it takes courage to be vulnerable and to be very, very clear. People don't hurt our vulnerability. Our expectations and then perceptions about people's actions when we're vulnerable is what actually causes pain or suffering. So, just to be like, to outline that, if I'm vulnerable because I choose as a person that that's how I want to show up. I want to speak my truth. I want to share my needs. I want to talk about my emotions or what's important to me. I want to set my boundaries and be honest, even when it's sometimes scary or hard. If that's me being vulnerable and I do those things, me living my truth is not going to hurt me, right? That vulnerability, me being truthful and honest and open and sharing, that vulnerability is not going to hurt me. What's going to hurt me is if somebody rejects my truth, and then in that moment, right? Because somebody can reject my truth, and I'm like, okay, well, then it wasn't a match. It wasn't a fit. It's not the vulnerable part that hurts. It's then when they do it that I tell a story about it. It's when I make somebody's rejection of my vulnerability mean that I'm bad, I'm not good enough, I did something wrong, I'm defective. When I tell a story about it, that's actually the source of the pain. So vulnerability is not weak. It's we only come to think that way or perceive it that way when we're in a dynamic with somebody where we tell a story about how they treat us and we link it back to our vulnerability. So we associate those things, right? And for the record, that comes from childhood, right? That comes from when you're a child. Sometimes we feel weak or helpless when we're small and we can't get our needs met or we don't have better ways of communicating. And then things happen to us. But as an adult, we don't have to go back into that same place. We can choose to live our truth. We can choose to live a life that's authentic and open and share and, courageous enough to be vulnerable. And it's either a fit or it's not. But if we don't give meaning to other people's actions when we're being vulnerable, then it loses its power to really hurt us. So, kind of went on a tangent there. However, because fearful avoidants can be really afraid of being vulnerable, that can be why they won't reach out after a breakup, because they're telling stories about their own vulnerability and giving it negative meaning. Number three, fearful avoidants are often living with limiting beliefs about relationships at the subconscious level of mind. So they often are like assuming the worst in the form of these ideas about relationships. People will leave anyways. It can't work out anyways. Relationships end in chaos. People get bored. People, betray you eventually. These limiting stories or ideas based on a tumultuous past and these imprints at a subconscious level that fearful avoidants carry, they reproject these imprints back out onto the world, right? Okay, since this was my past, this must be my future. But the reality is, like, if somebody's training for a marathon, maybe in the past, you could only run, half a mile. But as time goes on and we grow and we evolve and we change and we adapt, just because you could only run half a mile, 5 years ago or a year ago, it doesn't mean that you can only ever run half a mile for the rest of your life. But we do this thing at the subconscious level of mind where we just assume that the past will be our future, but it's simply not the case. And when we have limiting ideas or painful beliefs that we've acquired because of past trauma or history, it is so valuable to subconsciously reprogram those things in the present, because that's actually what frees up the way you will show up for your present and future relationships. And if you want to do a deep dive into a course, I highly recommend, like, just to get rid of like past baggage that we're carrying, trauma, imprints, wounding, that's just causing relationships to feel heavy and hard and confusing. We can let go of that stuff. We can recondition a lot of those different painful imprints and also understand like better strategies and tools to healthily and effectively navigate relationships so we feel like we can thrive and connect and be ourselves. So, anyways, you can check out the course Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming. And it is a course to hone in on all of that and help recondition those different challenges and pain points. And you can use the coupon code with you, all one word. It will give you 25% off of the Personal Development School for Life. So all of our courses, specifically in the All Access Membership Pass, so it will be all the courses you have access to. And I do 4 live weekly calls with all of our students. So you can come in, you can ask me questions on camera, off camera, type those questions in the chat. And there's lots of time for like interaction and chatting and kind of moving through different questions you might have, as well as taking all the different courses and joining in daily social events we also have in there. So anyways, I'll put the link down below for that. And the course again is Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming. Number 4, one of the big reasons that fearful avoidants won't reach out past relationship or post relationship, post breakup, post the ending of a relationship, I guess, is that burnout from relationships themselves. It is very common because fearful avoidants have this programming where they feel like they have to earn their worth, that they already overgive and overextend themselves and kind of overcompensate or overshow up for things. And then because they also feel like they can't communicate their needs, and they can't share their boundaries, they will often end up in situations where they're overextending themselves in multiple areas, not just the romantic relationship area, and then feel like they can't set boundaries, and it can cause them to over time burnout. It's like if you're giving out 10 out of 10 and you're only taking back in 5 out of 10, you're on a trajectory towards burning out, right? So that can be a big reason. And sometimes when there's like the added chaos or pain points from post breakup and like what's going on and some of that confusion, some of those things will often cause fearful avoidance to be like, okay, this is too much, I'm burned out, I've had enough, and just kind of like close down to keep themselves safe and to try to regulate themselves in some way or another. And number 5, fearful avoidants often fear and assume that because their needs weren't met in the past, that they can't be met in the future or again present. And largely that's because the fearful avoidant isn't communicating and isn't letting somebody know what they need for the relationship to be resolved. And so they carry this resentment because of that. They carry this resentment of like, oh, this person didn't meet my needs, so why would they meet my needs going forward? And that resentment acts as this barrier to connection. And it stops her from being like a clear pathway forward for proper reparation of past experiences. And so all of these things together can cause fearful avoidance to kind of get into like a why bother mindset. Like, okay, it's not going to work anyway, so who cares? Like, I'm not even going to want to put myself out there because of how things sort of ended off. And all of those things together can kind of create a perfect storm for fearful avoidance to go into that like really strong avoidance mode, which of course isn't always the best potential outcome, especially if 2 parties are willing to do the work, have the tough conversations, figure out what needs weren't met, come up with boundaries, and do the work on themselves and how they regulate themselves and communicate so that they can have that healthy, secure connection going forward. So I hope that all makes sense. Again, if you want to let go of a lot of that stuff you might be carrying from the past, Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course, you can use the coupon code at the All Access Pass. Check out with you for 25% off to PDS for life. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know questions you have down below, what your situation might be like with the fearful avoidant and the reaching out or lack of reaching out, and what you're kind of looking to gain insight into. I can definitely make future videos about that. And Thank you for watching and for being here. And please subscribe to this channel if you're enjoying this content. I will see you in the next video.